So then can you just couple that just for a couple of minutes with like, okay, that's the actual theft from Reagan.
Right.
But what is the historical? I mean, you even say, and I bring up the Trilateral Commission. Like, what was the actual process? Because we still see this in school textbooks today.
Clearly.
That erase and distort
in fact,
American
you
history.
say we were cuddling on the couch.
Yes, you were.
And I mentioned...
And I still came through everything like a champ. You guys were tremendously
so distracted.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Oh, geez, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
You should have just looked at, Okay, so here's the thing. So in the Trilateral Commission report, first of all, there was a Rockefeller speech that said something similar. There was the Powell Memorandum, which basically lays it out, but that was a private memorandum at the time. The public declaration of war on the progress of American democratic life is the Trilateral Commission report.
What year is this?
75.
75 is the publication.
Jump in too, if you know this too.
Yeah.
Please jump in.
And I'm turning to you.
Okay,
don't
great.
hesitate.
No
okay?
worries.
So, but you and I both have probably.
I
mean, the only reason I've read it more is I'm older than you are. I'm going to go back to it and back to it. I've got a rubber band to hold this thing together, and they lay out who the enemies are, who the threat to democracy is, what they call the excess of democracy, and the crisis of democracy. And you have to. What's the word they use? Dampen, temper, spit upon. I mean,
dampening something. Like
we
that.
got to dampen the democratic spirit.
Right.
And they actually
They
name
say
it.
the phrase dampen.
And they use the language of efficiency because democracy is inefficient. So it's very tied to the emergence of neoliberalism as well.
Decided the crew's there. Yeah.
But then, so actually, let me go on a tangent for a second. There's a new piece in the Baffler. I forget her name.
Yes, I saw that.
Franzik.
Piece. Yeah.
Is her last name, but it's called Century of Spin. I interviewed her on the Majority Report, but we'll be doing work here on this show as well. And so she actually traces the history of Bernays and Walter Lippmann.
Right. Yeah.
But it's the same idea of democracy always needs to be mediated and tempered and controlled by elites.
Right. And this is one of the major claims of the progressive movement in the capital P technical sense of progressivism, because progressivism has left-wing centrist and right-wing instantiations, and in American history the right-wing instantiation has really become the most prominent, I think. And it's I would say, I don't know what you think, Harvey, but I think the modern American state with its peculiar melding, the post-1945 state peculiar melding of public and private, is really the triumph of the right-wing progressivism, in the sense that it's organized around expert management, a sort of contract, government by contract, the outsourcing of government work to private institutions, which is, has totally exists today with, now we fight our wars with mercenaries and things along those lines. So I think that in some real sense, and we could talk about this, and so this right-wing progressive movement has, I think, had this really conservative effect on American politics, not the left wing, sort of like the Teddy Roosevelt type of right wing progressivism.
I mean, I've lived long enough in Wisconsin that it's La Follette are my definition of capital P progressivism. But
who are the enemies? I'm sorry.
So the
enemies
were not unpredictable given the moment. So help me out if I leave anyone out. So it's public employees, it's women, it's the poor, working poor and the poor. It's people of color. I think they used the term minorities at the time.
Right. Influenced by Moynihan.
Yes, students, I think.
The Soviet Union, very much.
Yes,
in there.
but not in this list that I'm referring to right now. The dampening of
that aspect of it.
Yeah. No. But the funny thing is, no, it's not funny. I say funny nowadays when I mean crazy.
Tragic.
It's fine. Yes. We get it.
Okay.
Tell me.
At the end of their list of enemies, it's media, which are liberal media,
Jews,
and and
these are Jews. A lot of them.
Here comes the punchline.
Or the bad Jews, because they're the good Jews.
This is the punchline one, the one that takes us into the question of history.
Right.
Value-oriented intellectuals, which meant humanists, humanities people, and most of the social sciences. They were distinguishing, they weren't going to say all university professors, because you had business professors and engineering and all that. So it was basically people like Daniel and I.
Right.
Okay. Do you go by Dan or Daniel?
Daniel's fine.
Daniel. Okay. It's like, sorry.
I like that. Hey, guys, you gotta have your fucking headphones on for these drops.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay.
Do it again. All right, go ahead.
Okay, very good.
I gave you the parent.
And what begins then, it comes out. Now the funny thing is that the Trilateralists were not the classic conservatives. They were not the Reaganites.
No, they were liberals.
They were liberals,
yeah.
or the proto-neoliberals.
Yeah, liberals cum neoliberals.
Right. So
Scoop
it was,
Jackson
David
type
Rockefeller
people, yeah.
was the money behind it. Brzezinski was the organizer. Jimmy
Daniel
Carter,
Bell was involved.
Daniel
I think.
Bell, Jimmy
Yeah.
Carter. I'm blanking on George H.W. Bush was in it.
Right.
Okay. So, but
And he was
eventually,
considered a liberal Republican at the time.
Right, very
Moderate
much so, yeah.
moderate. I don't.
Republican, right.
Liberal's liberal. That's pushing.
He
it.
wasn't Rockefeller, but yeah, moderate.
Yeah,
Moderate.
yeah.
Sure.
And this, of course, is also but when we can skip over. The point is that they launch a war on democracy. Are you right? I mean, that's a good.
Oh,
way to put
I
it.
would say so.
So,
Yeah.
so then can you build off of that and then connect it to the foreign policy dimension and how these guys intersect
Sure.
with the defense intellectuals?
Sure. So basically, what's really prominent at this time, and not to get too arcane, but basically they have a theory of society that society is a system, right? And that the way to manage the system is to have experts in charge of the system, and they'll move the pieces around, and the system will function. The problem, though, is that what comes up the works of the system is democracy, right? Because people are stupid. People don't know what they're actually doing, right? And so the purpose of I think the crisis of democracy, the Trilateral Commission report, is to argue in favor of this systemic management so that you'll actually be able to achieve what we're at, like Daniel Bell, liberal goals, like truly liberal goals, like full employment, things along those lines is going under this. But it's basically, I think at least, just an evolution of this previous idea that the defense intellectuals embedded in the national security state, which is this idea of expert management. For the defense intellectuals, they wanted to initially use psychological warfare and propaganda to trick people, but what the Trilateral Commission does is that they essentially remove people from the equation, right? That you can't even have, you're not even supposed to trick people anymore. You just have to totally remove them, because this is how you get this system to work. And they're very influenced by like these system theories of the 1950s and 1960s, game theory, systems analysis, what listeners might have heard of. So I think there's this large project beginning in the, let's say, post-World War I era, but it has origins earlier. Historians always say it always happened earlier and more complicated than you think. But let's say in the post-World War I era, this fundamental skepticism of democracy. But the problem is, as Americans, they have to claim that they believe in democracy. So there's always this project, which is to use basically social science logic to de-democratize American politics. And the Trilateral Commission is a later example of the defense intellectuals of the early 1940s, 1950s, and even earlier people like Bernays and Lippmann, who argued in favor of like advertisement methods to trick the people to argue, to do what you want them to do. So there's this long, decades-long history of like trying to de-democratize American politics.
And so is that an example?
Yeah, the way I've often put it is, democracy is okay, but we don't want any more of it.
Right.
Okay.
And maybe and
in this case,
we want to reverse it. We want to reverse it.
And in this case,
Right.
because it was getting out of hand, it was no doubt getting out of hand. I mean, I actually would say that they really did fear the resurgence of the struggles of the 60s, but in a new light. Fear drives a lot of this stuff. And I think they actually feared that these diverse movements of the 60s might find their way, they might coalesce, or they might at least align. I mean, they were haunted still by the New Deal, these people.
And the rise of fascism too.
Yeah,
because mass politics is like a fear.
Yeah, but I think they were really they really did look. I mean, the New Deal is far more, and this is where we might well differ. It's a far more radical process if you see it on a scale beyond specifically the policies to try to lift us out of the Depression. It's a radical moment in American history, the 1930s. And they're haunted ever since. I mean, Kim Phillips' fine work, all of that, however limited it is at first, the fact is that they were haunted by the fear of a New Deal.
Especially one that would also overturn American apartheid.
And,
I mean, that's the thing.
No, exactly.
See, that's the thing that I
Exactly.
think is really important. Just as I could just tell you, as like someone who's in this side of the equation, like. I just did an amazing illicit history for, I will plug, patrons. This is one you really got to hear, and I think we should probably unlock it because it's so brilliant. So she's a assistant professor of government at Cornell, and her new book it's a history of Medicaid and federalism and unequal democracy. And, she definitely, part of it is, and she says, look, I mean, Roosevelt, universal health care was taken off the table because Southerners, Democrats, were like, not only are we not, again, it's not even just the moral object, because yes, of course, they're horrible people and they don't care about health care for let alone, obviously African Americans because they're horrible racists. But they also saw that if you come in here federally and you literally start building hospitals that services everybody in the community, we're done. This has far-reaching implications for ending.
Right.
So as I read her, and I think, again, this is where there's a useful intervention, because I agree, and I think it's quite important to not have a rosy view of any part of our history and complicate it and certainly see how everything's racialized. But then conversely, if you're just going to go and have that one read of, well, these were the fatal flaws and that's it, you're missing the full politics of it, because what certainly people on the enemy side of the equation, they actually understand, and particularly in a 60s moment, in a 70s moment, that if you synthesized uprooting the systems of white supremacy and institutional racism, and you fuse that with a completion of the New Deal into an actual American, fully civil, broadly distributed social democracy, well, they would be, pretty much done.
Roosevelt would. One thing I would argue that the Roosevelt administration itself did not build race into its policies, but you had the Southerners were in absolute control of Congress, and Roosevelt's logic was, if you don't start it, then nobody's going to get to finish it. Sure. So when Truman proposed national health care in the late 40s, what blocked it was basically the idea we don't want blacks in our hospitals in the South.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we would have
this is Michener's history. Everybody, please read Jamila.
And in fact, I mean, for all of Truman's faults, which we can go on and on about, the fact is that he also launched, with the push from A. Philip Randolph, a series of what we would call civil rights initiatives. The report that he had commissioned.
We'll talk about A. Philip Randolph in the postgame. That's like a luminary people need to know more about.
Yeah.
But can you draw a connection though? Because I'm seeing an interesting disjuncture here. Because I feel like you're talking about, and they're fused together, but I can hear two different strains. So one strain is just American oligarchs who don't want people to have more well-being and more power. And you're also your work identifies a specific strand of intellectuals, mainly Jewish social democrats, who get so traumatized by Nazism that they go from being social democracy advocates to the architects of the military-industrial complex. What is the difference, and then how do they actually fuse together?
Sure. I think what's interesting to note in everything that Harvey's talking about is that all of the sort of expansions of the welfare state were totally linked to imperial adventures abroad. So the Truman call for healthcare comes right after the Truman Doctrine, right? With the national security funding. You think about the various Johnson Civil Rights Acts of the 60s in the midst of Vietnam, in the midst of the escalation of Vietnam. So you have this. No, that's fine.
Get to it later. No. This is great.
So I think that you have to view it in an imperial framework, and the goal for us today, I think, is to really develop a political language or develop a political ideology wherein you're able to get these massive expansions that were in the past, I think, at least justified by a sort of imperial adventurism without the imperial adventurism to sort of support these things. But I totally agree there are significant radical elements of the New Deal, even though I would guess, and I'd love to hear the critique, to me it's a little bit, and I don't want to trash the New Deal. Like, the New Deal was great. It's the best we got.
No, I'm not gonna. No, I was gonna talk about just the Truman.
Can we just add really quickly another historical an irony to this through a slogan? There's that idea that I think was first advanced in World War II by people like A. Philip Randolph. And again, it has to really be underlined, like, not only American apartheid, but like a system of apartheid that, like, when we think of South Africa, they helped design their system based off of what we did here, as did the Nazis. If you read this new book from Yale on, what is it?
Hitler's American Model.
Hitler's American Model. Yeah. I mean, this is, and some of the things that the Nazis didn't replicate from the Jim Crow South were things like, whoa, that's a little excessive.
Yeah, Hitler
the
said,
one-drop rule.
Yeah, that was too extreme for Hitler.
Yes,
yeah.
The one-drop rule is too extreme for Hitler. So that's what we're in the United States. But I think
didn't keep from doing everything else.
Right. And
right.
Said,
no, totally.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And they said, there was the phrase of the double V, like victory, double victory of fascism abroad, and then victory at home. And then, of course, there is the victory of fascism abroad, but not at home. And then it flips in the 60s, where there is some, again, just tangible, objective gains, not anywhere near a completion, but actual gains under Johnson. But then, just the genocide of Vietnam. I think we can use that word at that rate of murders.
I have 1,000 things to say, but let me go to one. Let me just go to one, just regarding the Truman. And again, I'm not a Truman apologist.
No,
but it was within months after Roosevelt's passing, Truman took the Second Bill of Rights and issued it, okay, and spoke it. So I don't see the one step as the second step. I don't see national health care as simply a device. I mean, sorry.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No,
No, but that's not what is that what you're. What are you actually arguing though?
That there seems to be a connection between some sort of militarism abroad and the expansion of the welfare state at home post 1945.
Yeah. Now, two thoughts occur to me. One, I would there's a thing that I would argue against.
Sure.
Except I also hear late 19th century Germany and Bismarck's creation of Social Security. So I don't deny. It would be interesting to try to untangle it, but I don't see the one as necessarily the impetus of the other.
Well, I mean,
because in 1930, when Roosevelt proposed Social Security, it was to include national health care, as we just said.
Absolutely.
And
well, but the imperialism component
So
is different.
basically, the idea being is that when the United States is fighting what is perceived as this global war with the Soviet Union, there needs to be a protection of the domestic front as home. And one of the ways to do that is to basically get white Americans on your side to fight this global war against communism. And I think the fair deal is part of that. And I think a lot of these Mary Dudziak's Cold War Civil Rights book, right, which is the argument that the reason civil rights were passed, it's a brilliant book, Mary L. Dudziak, the argument is that civil rights were only passed in the United States because the Soviet Union was making such hay about it in the third world.
So that the brand of the United States, particularly when you're dealing with Latin America or Africa, or Asia, is that this is the most prominent, overtly, purely discriminatory place on the planet. That's a very toxic brand. To go talk.
I like when you get hyperbolic, but
no, but true. No, I don't. I think that's objectively true.
Jim Crow South. In
the 50s.
I mean,
there's nothing competing with that. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let me come back. There was something else. It was. I can't waste your time. Sorry. It was. The problem with Dudziak and the problem with folks who make that case is the fact that the civil rights movement is growing and it's building. And the fact is what makes it happen is the possibility that there will be an explosion in the United States. It isn't that the Soviet Union is what it enables is these, if you like, foreign affairs questions are well timed for the sake of the civil rights movement.
Right. It's hard to disentangle, I think, in historical time, right? Because they're happening together.
And let's lay out that that we will be friends.
Oh, yeah.
The difference is that he's a foreign affairs historian, and I'm more of a social movement.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.